Welcome to the Lounge. As I mentioned, I have Darren Watts on today. We're talking about his storied and amazing career. I also want to mention a quick shout out to Pandemonium Comics and Games out of Boston. I picked up the Sentinel Comics starter set there and have been perusing that. It's very cool. So go out and check out the Sentinel Comics stuff that we talk about on here, and check out his new Kickstarter. I'll see you folks on the other side. I'm here with Darren Watts. Darren, what's going on?
Delighted to be here. I'm excited. It's Origins, man. All excited.
Yeah.
I am the Kickstarter for Sentinel Comics RPG was a smash success, and one of the titles that we're working on for it that they asked me to pitch in on is the fake history of Sentinel Comics going all the way back to the 1930s, basically. Every card in the game, has the quotes from the comics from all of the characters and everything for it. And from the beginning, you could tell there was a point to it, right? Like these weren't just randomly tossed out.
Yeah.
That Christopher and Adam had, they knew the world that they were building. So I pitched them on the idea of kind of like, the official handbook of the Sentinels universe kind of thing, right? That's
so cool.
The kind of Peter Sanderson kind of, gag for it. And so it kind of, the book kind of serves as both the story of the meta setting, the world where these guys are publishers and comics have come out every month for, 80 years of history. But it is also your guide for the RPG to the universe and to the publishing history. So the last quarter of the book is a fake Overstreet guide to collecting
That's
the
fantastic.
comics, right? So it's got every issue listed and what their prices were and everything and all that.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so we've got, part of what you could get when you bought in on the Kickstarter for it is the right to have your name in the book as a writer or artist who, was one of the people who created the heroes who are part of the Sentinel setting.
Oh, A, that's amazing. B, now I'm a little mad I didn't back it.
Well,
And I was like, well, this is a thing I'll pick up
it'll
later.
It'll still be up, but it's too late to get your name in it.
Yeah,
but we filled that part up for
the
you.
The next thing you do where that's coming up, though, I will back that
absolutely,
level.
absolutely. So that's me and Chris McLaughlin are writing the, like I said, the overarching lore book for it. And then as the series goes along, they're going to look, there'll be like deeper dives into each section of the universe, as it goes on. There'll be like a, street level Rook City crime thing, and then there'll also be like a space book and a, magic book and that kind of thing. I divided them by subgenre.
So I'm a huge comic book fan. We kind of discussed this earlier, and I like to think of myself a little bit as a comic book historian.
Likewise. Yeah.
And that idea of the meta element of the comic book industry existing in a superhero world, writing about that world.
Exactly, right.
I love that concept.
It's a new take on it for RPGs,
yeah.
Right? That the whole time that you're playing the game, you're also aware of the publishing worlds on the level above you, right?
Right.
Kind of thing of like, oh, right, our comic has to actually like behave like a comic book.
Right.
That's what we're trying to recreate.
That's what we're trying to do.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
I've talked to people before that are fans, and they're like, oh, it's always cheesy when they do that. But then I think of like when John Byrne was at the trial of Reed Richards
right. Yeah.
in a John Byrne written comic book.
Absolutely.
And it's a great story.
Absolutely. Or Stan and Jack doing that back in the,
back in the day.
Getting turned away from Reed and Sue's wedding, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not allowed in, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And plus, it's also kind of it's an opportunity if you're not a comic history person to kind of like get an idea of the way, kind of like the genres have changed over time, right? And I originally pitched Christopher on the idea of it. I was like, okay, I'm going to tell you a true story first. And so back in the 50s and early 60s, DC also had a bullpen. They just didn't call it that, and they didn't promote it the way that Marvel did, and kind of like build up their names. But there was an office in Manhattan, and it was mostly like the colorers and the letterers and, the support groups, right? Like most of the freelancers still work from home. But they had an office space, and so it was mostly kids. And then like Julie Schwartz as the boss
overseeing
in the office,
it,
right? Like running the thing. And there was this guy who would come in every day and go down to their break room. Big guy, probably in his early 60s, thick neck, nose had been broken a couple of times, just looked like a tough guy kind of thing. Would come in every day, pour himself a big pot of coffee, light up a stogie, and take out the phone and the racing guide, and then just bet on horses all day long. And none of these kids had the balls to actually ask him, like, what do you do here? What's your job? Why are you in our break room? Kind of thing. And they were scared of him, so nobody actually would ask him.
Yeah.
And finally, one of them goes to Julie Schwartz and says, Dave in the break room, what's his deal, right? Like, why is he here? He says, well, back before National turned into a comic book publisher, back before Action #1 and everything, they did pulps. And they did some spicy pulps and got in trouble and were busted for obscenity charges. That guy claimed he was the publisher, and he did 2 years in prison. And he's had a job ever since, a job, quote unquote, where he just comes in for, and bets on horses all day long because they've taken care of him.
That's such an amazing
It's
story.
DC was such like a mob operation before it became, like comics. Yeah, they've been taking care of this guy for 30-something years. He has a no-show job of, And that's a true story. Now imagine the version of that I can tell about your company.
Right.
In this book.
Well, so. I think of I'm fascinated by Donenfeld and Leibowitz, Jack Leibowitz.
Absolutely. Yep.
And Donenfeld died practically penniless. Meanwhile, Leibowitz died in his office at 98.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that story is amazing to me. I love
all of those guys. Major Wheeler, all of those people.
All those guys.
All those people are absolutely fascinating lives, and that's kind of the part of the fun of doing a book like this is being able to point stuff like that out to comic book fans today who don't know the history. Right?
Yeah.
So everything we make fun of Sentinel in the book doing is based on a true story about a real comic publisher, even if it's not the same one. Right?
That's
amazing.
amazing.
We do Fawcett, we do DC, we do Marvel, we do,
Yeah.
And there's gags related to all of them. And then there'll be an appendix in the back where we kind of explain, this really happened. This we've totally exaggerated. It wasn't really that badly mobbed up as we make Sentinel. Sentinel Comics in its history for it is basically just starts out as an operation just to launder money for the mob, for the St. Louis mob, right?
That's amazing.
And the more we piled it on, the more at no point did Christopher and Adam ever say no, stop.
Yeah,
right.
we
could not make enough fun of the the operation for it. They've been a delight to work for. So,
which, by the way, I can't help but think that somewhere Harry Donenfeld is so excited that somebody had his idea, because that's what he wanted to do.
Absolutely,
is be a mobster, and and found out he was doing better with the funny books.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, in our case, the guy who winds up running the company, he marries into the mob. Right? He marries the daughter of one of St. Louis leading mobsters, and he really wants to be a mobster, but he's just not that much of a tough guy.
Okay.
And so they're kind of we can't really find a job for you, and so they put him to work basically collecting. The St. Louis mob controls the newsstands, and so he's collecting the nickels and dimes from the kids for it because that's as tough as he can be, right? Kind of thing for this. And so through his management of the newsstands, he gets into comics and winds up accidentally creating this comic book empire.
Oh, what a beautiful amalgam of some real historical characters. I can imagine I've always been fascinated by the idea that at Fox Features Syndicate, you had probably the largest pool of talent that's ever been assembled in comics, just slaving away for, was it Victor Fox?
Victor Fox,
yeah.
Yep.
But that's
that was
where...
the very earliest, that was Eisner's first studio was there.
Yep.
All those people were,
Cole, I think.
Yep. Iger,
and that's why where Jack Kirby got the name King. That's so cool. That's the stuff that is always fascinating. Well, it's not always fascinating to me about comic books, but there was one point where I remember going, I feel like I've read through all the official handbooks of the Marvel Universe and the Who's Who.
Sure.
I've read through all that stuff. I know this stuff inside and out. I know the real name and home planet of every member of the Legion of Superheroes. Like, what more can I know? And I kind of got bored with it. And then I just started reading histories. And I'm like, this is awesome, too.
Absolutely.
So I love that it's parallel with that's super. And I don't know the Sentinels.
We read Steranko's books for it. We read, Gerard Jones, the Men of Tomorrow, all of those things, all those great histories of, these were crazy guys.
Yeah.
It was a very kind of wide open frontier, business with just a lot of people who really couldn't work anywhere else. Right?
It was like punk rock before punk rock.
It was very punk. It was very DIY. It was very just kind of, throw people in and they'll figure it out. It, was kind of a wild and crazy history period, and it's cool to kind of be able to point that out.
Yeah.
To a new audience, to a new crowd of
That's
people who come into it because they're into the Sentinels game, right?
Yeah.
The Sentinels world. And these guys, the Sentinels fans for it love the lore of their world, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're way into it, which is great. I love, dealing with people that enthusiastic. And so kind of building this second world on top of it, where it's not only do you get to care about the heroes and the villains and the aliens and whatever for it, but now you get to care about the fake publishers who were doing all of this, right? And of course, in that world, there are also a version of Christopher and Adam exists in that world as the publishers, right? So it just keeps going down, right?
Yeah.
Where the meta levels of this story just keep getting deeper every time.
A metaception thing basically happening where everything...
Which version of you are we actually talking about here? Is this the version in which the supers are real, or is this the version in which,
that's so
they're
cool.
comic book characters, or the version in which they're game characters pretending to be comic book characters?
I've been fascinated by Sentinels of the Multiverse since it first came out, and I love superheroes. I love superhero games. And when that was coming out, I was like, "Oh, this seems really interesting." But for whatever reason, I don't remember exactly why, I didn't jump on board.
Right.
And then later I'm like, "Ooh, I really have to get into this." Oh, this is big. I
yeah.
felt a little intimidated.
Sure.
Like I feel like a lot of people have with my hobbies, of comic book. It's kind of the first time I felt that way that I think people felt about comic books for a long time. It's well, where do I start?
Sure, right.
I feel like where I would start would be this.
Well, the RPG, we'll put all of that stuff that's kind of accumulated around Sentinels, the various versions of the card game, all of the expansions and everything, put it all in one place.
Yeah.
And there is, on top of this, underneath of it, this is all on top of a really excellent piece of RPG design by Dave Chalker, Cam Banks, Philippe Nard, and a couple of other people.
Okay.
Who have made a really excellent game that will support all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And from that point, the rest of us have kind of come in, myself and Chris McLaughlin and Tim Rodriguez and other people are just kind of ladling foolishness on top of their, on top of what is at core a really excellent game that I think people are going to appreciate when it hits, right? When it's the quick start rules have been out for a while,
which
to
I
show off.
I have.
They don't have character creation or anything in it yet, right? So the actual new game will be out soonly, sometime in the next few months. It's they're still putting it together, but
you, and they're going to get my money.
Yeah, all right. Good.
But how long have you been working in the game industry?
I date back to my very first game material was in Pyramid magazine back when it was an actual magazine.
Oh yeah, I remember.
So my first full-time work with this was when I bought. I was in traditional publishing. I learned to make books in the book industry, and we bought Hero Games in 2001.
Okay.
For it, and we put out the 5th and 6th editions.
Yeah.
I was the president of Hero at that time.
Okay.
So
okay.
That's why I transitioned to being full-time in games, I guess, was 2001.
That's awesome. I remember that very specifically because that was the point where Hero Games went from being kind of like a cool little thing to being like, oh, this looks really professional.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we were kind of, we were taken by surprise by how successful it was, right?
Yeah.
We wanted, we'd been fans for it. It had kind of been lying fallow with cyber games for a while, and I knew Steve Long and knew he had kind of like worked on what was eventually going to be a 5th edition manuscript, right? And I was a big fan of his stuff. We'd been friends for some time, and I was like, I bet if we put out a book for these guys, I mean, their website has thousands of visitors, and they haven't put out a book in 4 years, right? Like, I bet if we made a book, they'd buy it, right? And so we put out 5th edition and sold 20,000 copies in the first, 3 months, right? Like, it just blew out the door, and we're like, oh, we actually have to work on this full time now, right? Like, we all have to, leave our jobs because this has turned into a...
This is a real thing.
All of a sudden, we have an actual company here, and we didn't really kind of expect that, right? Like, we thought this would be kind of a little... Oh, we'll do a little side thing. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
No, we didn't really have that opportunity.
That's awesome.
And then eventually we did the video game and everything else that kind of... But I got out of the owning things business in 2011. We broke up. The Hero was great. It was great fun, and I'm very proud of everything that we did. 10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we put out over 100 books, and we were kind of coming to the end of that line going if we were a real publishing company, we'd have made another game by now.
Right.
Right? If we were Green Renine or something like that, we'd have moved on to the next thing. We only got together to do Hero.
Yeah.
Right? We didn't really have another thing that all of us wanted to work on. And as Hero was kind of, starting to slow down in sales and stuff, we were like, I think it's time to go do our solo albums.
Yeah.
Right? It's we got to break up the band or we're just not going to be friends anymore. Kind of thing. So I got out of the owning things side, and I've freelanced for Doctor Who, for Star Trek, for a bunch of other stuff since then.
That's awesome. So. Now, how do you like working on licensed products as opposed to? I mean, I feel like with Champions, especially with 5th edition, when you guys were kind of redefining everything, you kind of had a carte blanche. I mean, first of all, let me just say
we sold the IP to the video game operation, right? Because Jack Emmert, when he came on board, swore blind he was never going to work on a piece of intellectual property he didn't own.
Yeah.
Right. So he came in, to ownership of it. So and then gave us a free license back to keep making new material.
That's cool.
Right? And they were wonderful to work with. They never said no to us about anything. Right? They loved. So we just continued to pump out new games under that license to ourselves, basically, that he had.
Well, one of the things I just want to say that I remember the point where I was, because I'd been playing 4th edition for so long at that point, and I got the 5th edition book, but I hadn't read it. And then I saw Dr. Silverback in something, and I was like, I'm sold.
Thank you. There you go. He actually was one of the ones I didn't sell.
No?
For it. Steve kept the rights to Harbinger.
Okay.
And I kept the non-gaming rights to Silverback and Black Mask.
Really?
Those were my characters for it. And so I keep publishing Hero stuff occasionally for it under Silverback Press. Is the name of the company that I do. We did Golden Age Champions and a couple of other things for it.
So my two favorite characters from that, the Legacy character that I thought was really cool, and Dr. Silverback.
Those are my those were literally my PCs back in the 80s and 90s.
That's amazing.
Playing in Champions.
Oh my God. So. I like that I'm getting more excited as I talk to you, Darren.
No, it's fabulous.
But you had that point where you kind of had some freedom,
right?
And then you've worked on Doctor Who and Star Trek.
It's different working on stuff you own compared to stuff somebody else owns.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When I work with a license, it's much more about the fun of interacting with the thing that I'm already a fan of, right? So it may be a little less. I don't want to say less creative, but you have less invested in the world because somebody else does that.
Yeah.
Right? When I'm doing a Doctor Who thing for this, I'm doing this because I love Doctor Who, and it's kind of this is a promise to 8-year-old me kind of thing that someday I'd have the chance to actually do something like this, to actually contribute to it.
100%.
I can't pass that up, but it's not the same as actually owning something that I'm doing myself. Right. But like I said, I spent 11 years
doing that,
and kind of it's there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes with owning a company that's not the fun part, right?
Yeah.
That's dealing with printers and dealing with shipping and dealing with all the other stuff for it. And after 10 or 11 years, I kind of burned out on that. So now that I'm just freelancing, somebody else does all that stuff now. Now all I have to do is write, but it's tough to find. I mean, licensed IP tend to be the people who are looking for freelancers like me now, right? For it, I mean, most people who have their own kind of in-house thing have their own in-house teams and aren't necessarily looking for outside writers. Whereas, if I go to work for Modiphius for Star Trek, or I go to work for Cubicle 7, or I go to work for Sentinels, something like that for it, they own their own thing for this, and they are looking for, just professional writers to come in and fill it out.
Yeah,
right? So
that's cool.
it's a different kind of gig, but it's still a fun one, right? Because I get to pick. It's not like anybody, put a gun to my head and said I had to work for Sentinels, right?
Right.
I got to pick it because I liked it, you know? So
that's cool. I feel like there's probably a different way of. I want to say it's like writing between the lines, like as opposed to just having a blank sheet of paper. You know, like if you're doing a Star Trek thing, what's some of the stuff? My wife loves Doctor Who, and I love Doctor Who as well.
Right.
And of course, we're going to get to your favorite Doctor question. But before we get there, what's some of the stuff that you saw with developing that pushed beyond what somebody might encounter if they only know the show?
Within the game,
yeah.
Well, once again, it's a really nice, it's a smart piece of design of the game. It's the Doctor Who mechanics for it, because Doctor Who can go anywhere and do anything, right, and can get involved in any kind of story. They've really kind of like accidentally created an excellent generic system.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
Because it needs to be able to cover, like Doctor Who's going to deal with robots one day and cowboys another day and monsters another day and all the other different things that it can cover, which means, like a good superhero RPG, it needs to be super flexible.
Yeah.
Right. And the Doctor Who system is super flexible. It does a lot of really, it can cover a wide range of things, but it still feels like Doctor Who.
That's cool.
Right? Like the initiative mechanic is anybody who wants to talk goes first. Anybody who wants to run away goes second. Okay. Anybody who wants to do something physical goes next. If you want to fight, you go last.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's a great understanding of how the Doctor Who universe works.
Yeah.
Right? You can fight, but you're always going to be at the end of the line here for this, to let everybody who either wants to talk or run away get their thing in, right? That's a great understanding of genre built into the system, right? And there's a lot of little things like that with Doctor Who. When I got started with them, I had nothing to do with making those rules.
Sure.
The designers were years before me. But it was a question of literally I was talking to the owner of Cubicle 7, and he said, "Oh, we just worked out this deal where we got the rights to do the pre-Eccleston Doctor books, right? Like that had been a separate licensing thing because their license began with Eccleston and went forward. And so it wasn't until several years later that they had kind of like solved all of the licensing problems to do the first 8 Doctors, right? And so he tells me that, and I'm going like, I'm like vibrating next to him as this is going on. And he's like, "Why, do you want one?" And I'm like, "Hell yes, I want one," right? And he's like, "Who do you want?" And I want Tom.
Yeah.
And he says,
Yes!
he says, "No, too bad. You're American. You don't get Tom." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'll take Peter." And he kind of like looks at me and says, "Yeah, okay." I was like, that was the easiest job I ever got in my life, right? Because he could tell I was like so excited about it that clearly, So the first book I did for Cubicle 7 was the 5th Doctor source book.
Oh, that's so
Peter Davison
cool.
source book. So.
Oh, wow. Now, I mean, obviously you're going to research that.
It's, hey, they were paying me to watch them all again, right?
That's great.
Literally, right? This is actually a paid gig where I'm just sitting there with, like a stack of DVDs going through watching the whole thing. So.
When you're working on a project like that, especially with Doctor Who, because there's so many, like there's the show and everybody knows the show,
right? Yeah.
But then there's like the audio dramas, and then there's
Cubicle 7 doesn't have the Doctor Who game does not have the right to the audio drama.
Oh,
that's a separate license.
Okay.
Again for it. So,
okay.
Yeah. So for example, when we got to the 8th Doctor book, all we had was the movie and the one
short.
Time War episode short, right? So when we wrote the 8th Doctor one, first of all, we couldn't use the audiobook stuff as great as it is for it. But we put in a bunch of stuff in the text that made it clear that we had heard them, kind of thing. Right?
Okay.
So if you're a fan, you'll know, like we didn't come out and say anything for it, but there's a bunch of references. And then in order to fill out the rest of the book, because it was otherwise going to be such a short book, the second half of the 8th Doctor book is a 1 through 8 campaign.
Okay.
Right, to fill out the thing. So it's kind of like at the end of the 1st through 8th Doctor books, we end with here is a campaign that involves all eight doctors.
All 8 doctors.
Right, and like the Daleks are like trying to go back in time to like, they've fired a bullet back in time that is, like going to take out the Doctor at various points in his life along the,
Is it called the 8 Doctors?
I don't remember if we were actually allowed to use that or not.
Okay.
That was the working title for it.
Yeah.
But I think in the end, it turned into
It had to be something else. Yeah.
But it is clearly,
In my head canon, it's called the 8 Doctors.
Exactly right. Yeah, I think we put an actual title of like, because Daleks are up to something. I don't remember what the actual title was, but.
So how was it different between working on that IP and Star Trek?
Well, the Star Trek. I mean, with the Doctor ones, I was providing world information, right? For it, like this is about this, the universe of the 5th Doctor, right? Like when I'm writing that book, it's like this is what it's like. This is what the genre feels like. These are the ways the Doctor changed from 4 to 5, and then from 5 to 6, right? Like you would see it on both sides. When I'm writing Star Trek within the game is just a setting, right? Like I don't need to give you information about what the Enterprise is like.
Okay.
Right? What we're doing is giving you a story for your, for your stuff. So I didn't do. I believe the Star Trek game has a bunch of stuff talking about, the various shows and the specifics on them. But what we were writing were just new adventures in that setting.
Okay.
Right. So. There was no requirement for us to sit down and explain to you who the Ferengi are.
Sure.
Right? Which in the Doctor Who stuff we would have done.
Right.
To actually kind of like walk you through in case you were new to this or, didn't know what it was. Whereas in the Star Trek stuff, it all editorially, we just kind of assumed you've got all that stuff down already. Here's just a cool new story to interact with.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like another step back from the IP and more concerned about, does this feel like a Star Trek story?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so everything that we put in the adventures has notes about, depending on what era you're playing in, how to modify the story. So you can use this adventure for Classic Trek or for Next Generation or for Deep Space Nine or whatever. And here are the notes of like how you would change that depending on what it is you're already doing at your table.
That's really neat.
So.
Okay. So they're two different kind of projects overall.
Yeah.
Did you find one more restrictive than the other? And then, I feel like you probably had a little bit more free reign at Sentinels than either of those.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Sentinels, we're building it. I'm we're kind of like present at the creation kind of thing, right?
Right.
We're not really, for either Star Trek or Doctor Who, have long since gone by, right?
Right.
Like the rules for both of those are pretty well established, right? With Sentinels, I got in early enough on the process that I, was able to kind of participate in the idea of like, oh, how exactly are we going to do this? What rules are we presenting? But even at that point, the card game had existed for years already, and the fan base had already like built up around the card game. So sitting down to do the RPG, we already had an avid fan base and a whole lot of history.
Yeah.
That was at least implied and had never really quite been. I mean, Christopher and Adam do their podcast and all of their stuff about what the history of the universe is. But a lot of this had never been written down and never been organized, right? It was all in Christopher's head, and nobody had gotten it out onto paper. So the first time I went to the GTG offices in St. Louis, they had a room that was probably 30 by 30, and arranged, like literally stuck on the walls, on like all 6 walls around this room, were Post-it notes that were color-coded. Like the paper they were on was color-coded, and then the ink they were written on was color-coded, organized vertically, month by month, from 1939 to 2015. What had been published that month, like what stories and where things were that they were like rearranging, and literally all doing it by Post-it note.
Holy shit.
And I walked in to look at this going like, this is the most insane thing I've ever seen. If anybody sneezes, you're going to lose like an entire portion of the universe. Can't we get somebody to make a spreadsheet out of this, right? Like Excel exists, guys. Like I don't mean to, And they were like, but this is how we think about it, and it is so much easier to just grab a thing when we realize, oh, this couldn't have happened here. This has to happen over here, right? They're literally grabbing Post-it notes off the wall and moving them around. And so you can find that Maggie took pictures of us sitting in the room. I'm like, so what? Do I just move into this room for the next 6 months while I'm writing this book? Of, like, how do I, And they're like, no, we'll turn this into a spreadsheet, but we're not done with it yet. It's not ready to be spreadsheeted because this is what it looks like in my brain, right? Was Christopher.
That's amazing.
So we went through and we filled in, it's like, okay, well, like the, first appearance of Cargo Warfang has to be at this point because it needs to be before this, but after this, kind of thing. And just like arranging the continuity of the universe.
Yeah.
Christopher was so full of stories and more or less had it in his head the order that they happened with, but had never kind of like sat down to deal with what does, what's the implication of this, right? Like a whole bunch of things to him sort of just happened in the 80s and he wasn't sure exactly the order they happened in. And then you got a lot of what we called the magical xylophones, right?
Okay.
The Simpsons reference for, right? There's supposed to be some sort of magical xylophone.
Yep.
Where, for example, the character Tachyon must exist in the Sentinels universe before the particle was named Tachyon.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So clearly that means that whoever it was who discovered the particle named it after the character.
Yep.
Right? So now we've just did a whole bunch of world building right there, right? Like clearly this Nobel Prize winning scientist was a big comic book fan in order to name, because Christopher hadn't like thought of when was the Tachyon actually named, right? And well, it turns out if Tachyon needs to first appear in 1957 and they haven't discovered the Tachyon until 1962, well, too bad.
Yep. It's
so we made a list of all of those of,
It's the free lunch paradox.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So when Arthur C. Clarke says sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, he's quoting Baron Blade, because Baron Blade said it first.
He said it first.
Right? A thing we didn't discover until we sat down to build the timeline. Now it's, oh shit, that's actually when, okay.
Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke must have been a big Sentinels fan. So
It's funny because I know exactly how that goes because I spent a lot of years kind of trying to build my own comic book universe. And I found I would name things after stuff that happened. One of the examples I have is I had in 1900 there was an evil doctor who used a seismic wave device called Dr. Richter.
Yeah, right.
And the same thing.
Yeah.
And like, his nephew ends up being
right. So we, like I said, most of the time, and Christopher and Adam are so good-hearted about this, that like when we make fun of them for that sort of thing, right, they totally are, that's fine, whatever. So
I also like that approach, too, because I love the idea of the no prize. That's my way of approaching fandom in general.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what that is. Like,
exactly.
We're not wrong.
Explain why we're right.
Yeah, exactly.
And in doing so, you kind of like inadvertently create setting, right?
Yeah.
Like it's once you kind of like tried to explain this thing, oh, well that means, this or whatever. And it just makes the universe that the characters are in feel more organic. Right?
Yeah.
It's like if you like go back and try to like not undo the mistakes, but just kind of paper them over, that papering over creates worlds for you, right? Like then now you've got like a thing to actually interact with. Well, yeah, if Sentinel Comics was really popular with scientists back in the 50s and 60s, so that like Nobel Prize-winning scientists were naming things after them. That kind of tells me about what kind of comics they were publishing in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
Like clearly, like this had to have some.
They were the original National Comics,
right,
clearly.
Exactly,
So, that's awesome. There are fandom questions that have come up.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw those out there.
Okay.
I'm guessing I know the answer. Your favorite Doctor?
I have great personal attachment to Peter. My favorite stories are the Tom stories.
Okay.
Particularly like the old Victorian Gothic, horror stuff that they were doing for it. But because I worked on Peter's book and I have since met him several times and become friends with him, we do a bunch of conventions together.
Yeah.
Like we're on the same circuit of. And so, personally, he's my favorite Doctor because he's just the nicest guy in the world.
That's great.
So, the first time we were guests together at a show was at Gen Con. And, I kind of came up to him because I had literally just written the Fifth Doctor book. And I was like, I just wrote a book about you. I have a million questions. Also, I'm also a guest, so you can't hide from me. I can go anywhere in this place you can, right? So let's just get this over with now,
That's fantastic.
And it's like, and my mom is an enormous fan of Peter as an actor, not from Doctor Who, but from All Creatures Great and Small.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so I was like, I would love to get, and I'm totally will stand in your line, whatever, to do your charity signing thing or whatever for this. But I would really love to get an autographed picture of you from All Creatures, not from Doctor. He kind of looks at me for a moment, he's going like, I've been going to conventions for 30 years. Not one person has ever asked me for. I don't have an All Creatures picture, headshot or something. So we sat down and looked through his notebook and like found the oldest, like appropriate one of him, even if it's not from the set or anything from it, not in costume. And he signed it to my mom and sent it off for it. So I was just like, this guy is the sweetest guy in the world. And we have since done, I think, 3 or 4 other cons, that we were both guests at. So
that's really cool.
So he's my guy.
He's your guy. Yeah, that makes sense. I've always said, Fourth Doctor will always be my favorite because my grandmother had a crush on him.
Okay.
It introduced me to both Doctor Who and like sci-fi geekdom in general.
Right, there you go.
So that was my introduction. But I do love all the Doctors.
4 and 10 are the high points as a writer in the series.
Oh yeah,
those are the kind of like the 2 eras for it. But on the other hand, I also had a massive crush on Nissa. So like what
I mean.
So I was 13 at the time,
yeah,
right?
Of course you did.
Absolutely. So.
But I have a love for all of them. That's what I say. I love them all equally.
Absolutely.
But my grandmother loved the 4th one. So.
Yep.
Your favorite Star Trek series?
I'm once again, I admire the hell out of Next Generation and Deep Space, but I'm a classic.
You're a classic.
I'm a TOS guy.
I'm with you on that.
That's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
I was already in college by the time Next Generation came out, so
I rediscovered the animated series not too long ago, and it's a lot better than I remember it being.
Absolutely, yeah. There are several really good episodes in there for it, and there's stuff written by some great writers.
Oh, yeah.
Larry Niven did an episode of that.
Right.
I mean, it's so, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So then the last thing I want to kind of ask in regards to fandom is what is your favorite like comic book? I don't want to say comic book character, but like is there any comic book project IP out there that you would want to work on, want to write on?
Oh, there's a million of them. Absolutely. Well, you can't see this, but I'm wearing my Legion T-shirt right now here for this. I would love to straighten out the Legion.
Oh,
DC, like right now for it.
Yeah.
I'd love to come back and like fix.
If you need a co-writer for that,
right? I want to fix the all the messed up continuity and everything for it. My dream Legion project would be to do a Legion series right now that takes place like 100 years after the Magic War, right? And just like ignore all of the continuity snarls, just be like Star Trek Classic to Next Generation, right? Like we're just jumping over a whole period of time.
Yeah.
I want to come in with, like the world after that, and I want to have a bunch of new characters, but still keep the Legion setting, right? Like, and I want to tell the story of Brainiac 6.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All the other, like everything to like kind of spin off time after that. That would be a dream project. I really want to write a Dead Man series.
Ooh.
Right? I love Dead Man.
Oh, that's a good one.
I love all the 70s Kirby stuff, right? Like, I would love to do a New Gods story. I would love to do an Eternal story. I would love to do a Commandy story, right? Like all that stuff that Grant Morrison has kind of like claimed relatively recently.
That's true.
I would kind of like to take back and do my takes on them. Those are the guys that I.
That's
love,
fantastic.
Right? So. Yeah, those are
those
would be my big ones for it.
Those are great answers. Awesome. What do you have next? Is there anything?
Well, the Sentinels book is still not quite finished.
You're still,
they are still kind of like piecing together the last bits, so it's still sitting on my desk, and we keep updating the price guide, right? Like every time some new thing has changed in the continuity, it's like, oh wait, I got to go back and change the prices on those comics now. That's clearly much more collectible than I thought it was. That's clearly going to cost $200 instead of just the $50 that I gave it last time or whatever. Now that you've put this cool event in that story, so that's kind of sitting there. That's been 90% done for a bit, and it's just kind of waiting for the last parts. I have just done my first card game. Which is based on the We Rate Dogs Twitter account.
Okay.
We licensed that, so we have a game called We Rate Dogs.
Oh, okay.
And that dropped to retail at the end of April, so that is just out now. I'm not really quite sure. I haven't gotten the sales figures yet back from it, but they pre-ordered really well, so
my wife will be getting a copy of that when I return home.
There you go. He's been great to work with. Matt has been fabulous. We were working on. So the genesis of the game was we were live tweeting Westminster a couple of years ago. Just some friends of mine and I,
Sure.
making fun of it just because we love watching the show. And our joke was that we were calling it like it was an actual sports event, right? Like we were making up stats, and it's, the Pomeranian just wanted it more, kind of thing. Oh, we don't want to put any quotes in the locker room, kind of thing that'll get them all worked up. So as we're doing this, like a couple of my friends were like, "This is really funny. We should make a game out of this," right? I was like, okay, well, if you make a dog card game, I know dog shows. I'll totally write the fluff for your dog show game. Whatever,
That's
right?
amazing.
So the whole time we're working on this, throwing together this thing, and this was just going to be a little throwaway. Maybe we'll Kickstart it for 15 or 20,000 or something, and just get it done and out. The whole time we were doing it, we kept making We Rate Dogs jokes because we were fans of the account. We think it's funny, right? And so, like the 5th or 6th We Rate Dogs joke that went by, Steve Tasker says, "Has anybody ever called him? Is that a thing that you could license, or who is he, right?" And so we tracked him down. His name is Matt Nelson. He's 27 years old. He lives in Pennsylvania, and made a fortune off, selling ads on his account, his Twitter accounts and everything for us. And we call him up and tell him the basics of the thing. He's like, "Not only yes, but I forbid you to go any farther without me." Right? I totally want a card game. I think that would be awesome to do, but you have to take out all of the breed stuff, right? Because the aesthetic of We Rate Dogs is mutts are awesome. Right?
Okay.
So you can't have any of the oh, is this a good German Shepherd kind of thing. No, it's just, is this a good dog? And we're like, you just made our game 100 times better. Right? Like that's actually way cooler than what we were doing. So we completely rewrote the game to match the We Rate Dogs aesthetic. And then we kind of looked at each other and we're like, he's got 18 million followers? We need a bigger boat.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is not, Kickstartering this is just not going to be plausible. So we wound up taking it to Chronicle Books. Because they know memes, right? Like they were Grumpy Cat's publisher and stuff like that. Right? So they know how to market and deal with that kind of, So we brought it to them and said, "Hey, we've already signed Matt. Are you interested in publishing this?" And they were, "Absolutely, yes." And they made it look gorgeous. Their graphics department is amazing, and they got it. Like I said, they put it out. Came out the end of April, and it's beautiful to look at and selling. Apparently, as far as I know, very well. So and pre-ordered very well. So.
That's awesome.
The day Chronicle, gets serious about games, there'll be a huge publisher in this industry.
Oh, yeah.
Because they already know all the hard stuff, right? Like they know how to get a game into Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Target and stuff like that. So they've got the hard parts down. They just need to figure out how to get their stuff into game stores, right? I can teach them that.
That's true.
So
I mean, that's something you understand.
That's the easy side, of doing this. So
that's awesome.
So they've been a joy to work with. Matt's been a joy to work with.
Yeah.
We were in People Magazine. I've never had a game in People Magazine before. That's not a Usually my cool. Side of the gig does not get that kind of exposure. So
well, I am excited to bring that home to my. I'm going to play it too, but my wife's going to be super excited.
There you go.
It.
Excellent. It's full of adorable dogs, man.
Yeah.
It's hundreds of cards of adorable dogs.
So, do you have anything else that's on the burner? Or?
I'm currently working on a Savage Worlds setting with my good friend Jess Nevins.
Okay.
That is basically we are refighting the Cold War with kaiju. The third bomb we drop on Japan wakes up the monsters.
Okay.
And from that point on, history has changed. And instead of the Cold War being kind of, like a nuclear stalemate, it becomes a stalemate over the science that we have learned from the giant monsters. Because clearly, if giant monsters exist, the square cube rule is out the window. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's clearly there's a whole new kind of physics we have to learn.
Yeah.
And once we have learned that, then we have cool gadgets and weapons and stuff to kind of use against each other. So we are racing around the world, competing for either capturing and or killing giant monsters, and then using that science to continue the Cold War, basically. So
wow.
So we're all the PCs are all kind of Johnny Quest type scientists or Super Mario Nation.
Oh, that's so amazing.
the color-coded jumpsuits kind of thing, and then cool, vehicles and
It's 100%
mountain
what I was
bases and,
imagining.
oh yeah, totally. So,
Oh, that's so great. Is that going to be Kickstarted, or
yes.
are you okay?
Yeah, we're working with Battlefield Press.
Okay.
Jonathan Thompson is going to be the publisher for it, but we are literally still in the writing and playtesting part of it. Like, it's what my home group is testing right now.
Here's the good news. When you're ready to kickstart, you can come back on the lounge.
Sure, yeah,
You can do
absolutely.
another hour, because I love chatting with you.
Absolutely, be delighted.
And then we can really get into the nitty gritty of that, because I'm now excited about
There
that.
you go. It's Savage Worlds is brand new to me, so like part of doing this, I'm delighted with it so far.
Yeah.
Because the new edition, the suede edition for it, has been great fun to work with.
It's really nice.
But all the time, when Savage Worlds kind of like hit its peak, I was with Hero at the time, so they were kind of like, oh, they're the competition. I don't actually play their game, kind of thing, right? Even though I knew that they did really good stuff, I was unfamiliar with the setting. So I have spent the last few months, in the last few cons that I've gone to, kind of like sitting down with people to like see how they do Savage Worlds and how that actually works. And I'm really delighted with it. I think it's very cool.
So I didn't really know Savage Worlds until I actually was in the process of creating a variation on Rifts for another system, and
Right.
somebody's like, Savage Rifts is coming out, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to wait to see how this
And
is.
see what that looks like, right?
And that's how I learned Savage Worlds, and I realized that's like the sideways of way to learn.
Totally.
But like, you can do those epic big things that work with kaiju really well.
I wanted a game when we were picking what system this was going to be, because we'd written the premise before we picked what system it was going to be, and I very much wanted a game that was crunchy enough that differences between gadgets would matter.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I didn't want this game to be, I have ray gun 1d6,
Yeah.
right, kind of thing. I wanted to have, like the Soviet ray gun and the US ray guns or whatever, to be slightly different and to have people be able to argue over which one was better.
Yeah.
Right? And I wanted to have, something where vehicles were cool and interesting and had a cool combat system. The suede chase design mechanic is tremendous. I think it's really, really good. So that's why we wound up picking it, was just that, like I said, we wanted to have that kind of like granularity of stuff, of toys, but still have a game that was fast-paced, that was adventurous, that had kind of a modern,
And it's a nice
aesthetic to it. So.
fun middle crunch game too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, that's so exciting.
And then by the time we were coming up with deciding to do that, that's when Suede was kickstarting, and then that Kickstarter went off for whatever 400 and whatever grand that it made up for. And we're like, yeah, there's a fan base there too, so let's make sure let's feed them something here for this.
that's perfect.
So that's why we found Jonathan for it, because he had published Savage Worlds stuff before. Of the three of us, he's the one who knows Savage Worlds the best. So he's kind of,
That
helping
makes sense.
steer me and Jess through, oh, no, wait, you should look at this other book here. They've got some dinosaurs. You can build your kaiju up from the dinosaurs.
Try this,
So,
yeah.
So.
That's awesome. Darren, this has been fantastic. Where can people find you? Social media.
So I was going to say regular social media, since I've since I'm mostly freelance now, I don't have like my own site or anything here for it. But I usually work with the Double Exposure crowd at cons. So anything with the Envoy and Herald system, I'm also the managing director of the Envoy program. So if you need to find me at a show, go look up where the Envoy section is. So.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much, Darren.
Not at all. It's been a delight. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been great chatting with you, and I think you're probably going to be my wife's favorite interview.
Oh, hi, wife. What's her name?
Kristen.
Hi, Kristen. How are you?
Isn't he an awesome guy? I could have just talked to him forever. I want to thank him. I want to thank Darren Watts once again for being as patient as he has been. It's been a few months. I'm glad that I can put this out when we've got a new awesome Kickstarter going on. Go check out Explorers of the Fantastic on Kickstarter right now. Get it up there. I want some of those stretch goals for my copy. So let's do that. And besides finding Darren in the reams and reams of books that he has worked on, you can also find him at Darren Watts 27 on Twitter. Go check him out. Follow him. Everything he does is great. So, but Speaking of my wife, hey, here she is now.
The Lounge is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs, with lots of great shows like this one. Panda's Talking Games. Phil and Senda answer your questions about RPGs from the perspective of one-shots and campaigns, with some Panda silliness. The Lounge theme, And So It Begins by Artificial Music, is used under Creative Commons 3.0. Support Contessa at contessa.rocks. Find your host, Jesse Doc Edmond, at Doc Palindrome on Twitter. All the links from this episode can be found in the episode description. Stay classy, Lounge Lizards.